all the eminent delegates and participants who are joining us from different countries. A very hearty welcome to all of you on behalf of the Election Commission of India. I welcome you all to this one-day virtual summit for electoral democracy. Ladies and gentlemen, as you join us, I would like to request you all to please have your mobile phones on the silent mode, on the meeting mode. I'm sure it is in your vicinity, so just ensure that it is kept on the silent mode. Also would like to request our esteemed distinguished speakers to please have your mics on the mute mode when you are not speaking, and just ensure just a little before speaking to kindly put a tone as you've given your address to once again have it on the mute mode. Yes, as far as your videos are concerned, we would like to request you to have it on at all times so that there's a better connect and communication with you. We can all see you and accordingly relate to your deliberations and discussions. As we start in a while from now, as per the Indian Standard Time, we're going to be starting at 2 o'clock, and if we are good on time, we should be closing by 5:20. We have 2 technical sessions which are flagged on the either end by the inaugural session and then a closing session. The technical sessions, as we are going to be starting, we have our co-chairs who are going to be giving their opening remarks. That's going to be then followed by the presentations by our presenters, followed by the discussions, and the technical sessions are going to be concluding with the remarks of our co-chairs. So that is how we have placed in both between the 2 technical sessions. We are also going to be taking a short tea and coffee break and then resuming with our technical session 2, leading us to the closing session, the concluding session. We also have one of our speakers who is going to be addressing us in the Russian language. Towards that, we have our interpreters. So they are going to be converting, translating from the Russian language to the English language. And for all our delegates and participants who are joining us from Russia, they are also going to be translating from English to the language. So that's, we are good to go to start with the summit in a short while from now. We're just waiting for the Honorable Commission to join us, and then we begin. Once again, a very hearty welcome to all of you. Ladies and gentlemen, the Honorable Election Commission of India, we welcome Honorable Chief Election Commissioner of India, Mr. Rajiv Kumar, Senior Deputy Election Commissioners of India, Mr. Dharmeen Sharma and Mr. Chandrabhushan Kumar, and all the other senior officials of the Commission. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Vimi Chaudhary, the facilitator of this meet, and I welcome you all in this summit. And before we begin with our discussions and deliberations, and we have our expert panelists taking center stage, please allow me just a few minutes to set the tone and the context towards this summit. Now, this virtual summit, ladies and gentlemen, is actually a run-up to the Global Summit for Democracy, which has been proposed by the National Electoral Institute, and it's likely to be held in September 2022. And this global summit calls for the electoral authorities around the world and also the international organization to come on one platform to ideate, discuss, deliberate on the various issues and challenges being faced by the democratic regimes around the globe, and also through their discussions and deliberations propose interventions, solutions, action plans, and a way forward towards tackling these challenges, especially towards making our elections more free and fair. And prior to this global summit, there are 5 virtual regional meetings which are being held from June to August 2022. We've already had 3 regional meetings for America, Europe, and Africa. And the last one and the next one for the Middle East and North Africa is going to be happening later this month. Today, we are for the Asian Regional Forum meeting being organized by the Election Commission of India, and it is on the theme Making Our Elections More Inclusive, Accessible and Participative. And towards that, we seek the views, the opinion of all our eminent and very distinguished guest speakers who are joining us today. Must we also mention that the Election Commission of India, through its flagship program, the SWEEP program, Systematic Voters Education and Electoral Participation Program, has been unwaveringly working towards ensuring that no voter is left behind. In fact, this has been its very guiding principle towards all the various initiatives and interventions which ECI has been taking towards voter education, voter engagement, and extending facilitation to the senior citizens, to women, and to the people with disabilities. It has been ensuring that the voice of every voter, of all categories of voter, is included in the democratic representation. So with that brief little outlook to this entire summit, ladies and gentlemen, we open the doors to the discussions and the deliberations. And at the very onset, I would like to request our Honorable Senior Deputy Election Commissioner, India, Mr. Dharmeen Sharma, who brings with him a very rich and a diverse administrative experience, having worked in various ministries of the UTs and the states and in the union government. He's worked as the director in the Department of Economic Affairs, Ministry of Finance, and also with the Ministry of Petroleum and Natural Gas. And his last posting was as the Chief Secretary of Goa. As I once again welcome you all, I now hand over the floor to Mr. Dharmeen Sharma for his welcome remarks.
Namaskar, very cordial good afternoon from the Indian Standard Time to all of you. Honorable President Councillor, National Electoral Institute, Mexico. Honorable Chairpersons, members and officials from participating election management bodies across the world. Honorable Chief Election Commissioner of India, Shri Rajiv Kumar. Honorable Election Commissioner of India, Shri Anup Chand Pandey, who will be joining us shortly. Distinguished ladies, delegates from International IDEA, IFS and EBWeb, colleagues from ECI, ladies and gentlemen. It is my privilege to welcome you all at this Asian Regional Forum of Electoral Democracy. We at ECI applaud the National Electoral Institute of Mexico for taking the initiative of organizing the Global Summit for Democracy. ECI is proud to be associated with this initiative and for hosting this forum today, which aims to promote institutional mobilization to strengthen electoral democracy in the world. World over, democracies have invested in the research, innovative strategies, new initiatives, programs, and practices for ensuring transparency in the election process and empowering voters for a confident and ethical electoral participation. Significant and substantive notable good work has been done in this regard by different countries through strategic initiative and program, yet a lot more needs to be done. The Election Commission of India appreciates greatly that you, Excellencies, Commissioners and Senior Representatives have taken the time out to be with us for this virtual meeting today. The program includes a welcome message from Honorable Lorenzo, Council President for the National Electoral Institute of Mexico, keynote address by Shri Rajiv Kumar, Honorable Chief Election Commissioner of India, presentation by the participating EMBs and international organizations in 2 sessions, followed by a question and answer segment after each session and the concluding address by Shri Anup Chand Pandey, Honorable Election Commissioner of India. Once again, I extend a very warm welcome to each one of you in this forum. We look forward to a stimulating discussion and fruitful interaction during the day. I am confident that the ideas and experiences shared at the forum will be in immense use to all of us. Thank you.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, we have the welcome remarks by His Excellency Mr. Lorenzo C. Vionello, the President Councillor, INE, Mexico. Mr. Vionello.
Good afternoon to everyone. Let me start by sending my greetings to the national electoral authorities and representatives of the international electoral associations promoting democracy, which are participating in this Asian Forum for the Summit for Electoral Democracy. I want to send special greetings and thanks to the Election Commission of India and to its Honorable Chief Commissioner, Mr. Rajiv Kumar, for the dedication and engagement placed in the organization of this forum and the efforts to strengthening democracy in the region. As you probably know, today's forum is the 4th in a series of regional meetings that we have been holding since May of this year. After addressing the challenges, concerns, and reflections of electoral authorities and experts in Europe, the Americas, and Africa, Now, we direct our attention to Asia. In a few weeks, we will be increasing our understanding of the global electoral matters and democracy challenges to cover the Middle East and North Africa. We will finally conclude in September in Mexico City with the Global Summit for Electoral Democracy, when all the reflections and considerations shared in these engaging regional conversations will converge in a collective dialogue. As I have mentioned in previous opportunities, rather than a series of isolated regional events, we seek to engender a broad and inclusive discussion and exchange of experiences fed by diverse voices from a variety of sectors, institutions, and with different perspectives, but all of them with the same concern, which is to promote and recover the value of democratic elections as a mechanism for building peace and a common future, to harness elections as a civic tool to strengthen plurality and give direction to the destiny of our nations and the world. The broad alliance of electoral organizations and institutions that convene this series of regional forums and the Global Summit also seeks to promote an agenda of collective action to revitalize democracy and elections in the emerging new global order. We want to do this because we believe the historical moment we are currently going through requires this commitment. Democracy has been experiencing critical moments for some years already. After several decades of expansion in the world since the beginning of this century, but especially in the last 10 years, democratic regimes are being questioned for their ability to govern in conditions of plurality and improve the quality of life of contemporary societies. The lack of attention and solutions to problems such as poverty, inequality, corruption, violence, and impunity, just to mention a few, have been the breeding ground of an understandable discontent with the governments emanating from free and fair elections. Citizens lose interest in elections because they perceive their problems and needs, far from being addressed, have intensified, or because elected authorities represent their own interests and those of their parties more than the concerns of the public. The situation has worsened with the advance of discourses and practices that offer effectiveness in solving long-lasting problems, but at the expense of a democratic backsliding, reversing achievements that are key features of a democratic life, such as free and fair elections, the regular renewal of public powers, the democratic control of political authorities, free press, and the respect to human rights. Being the epicenter of the COVID-19 pandemic, Asian nations have shown the world how democratic institutions can actually help to improve the odds of recovering from major economic and social challenges. Indeed, well-functioning democracies where both individual and collective rights are recognized and respected contribute to the resilience of our nations. As the titles of the working sessions of this forum indicate, there is a key challenge in the Asian region in terms of increasing the participation of citizens in electoral processes. In this regard, it is clear that national EMBs should work to make elections more inclusive and accessible to all, including marginalized social groups. At the same time, EMBs face particularly difficult challenges in organizing elections and promoting participation in those places where there are constraints of freedom of expression, disinformation, and polarization, all of which stress the social fabric on which democracy rests. These are global trends to which Asian countries are no strangers. Therefore, today, more than ever, it must be very clear that no problem can be solved from an authoritarian logic. On the contrary, the problems of democracy can only be solved with more democracy. As Mahatma Gandhi once said, I quote, a democrat must utterly selfless. He must think and dream not in terms of self or of party, but only of democracy. Indeed, this is a time that calls for democrats around the world. In these testing times, we should always remember the pluralistic, non-violent, and ethical view of democracy that Gandhi gave us through his word and deeds. Not only to the Indian people, but to the citizens of the whole world. This Asian Forum is part of a global conversation that we hope will lead us to strengthen and renew electoral democracy all around the world by identifying the challenges within each culture and region, but also recognizing the common trends and actions that together we can implement to renew the global democratic pact. Thank you very much for your commitment and the best of luck with your deliberations.
We thank Mr. Vayanelu for his inspirations and directions to our deliberations. And now, ladies and gentlemen, as we seek to be led and guided by the experience, views, and the expertise of our Chief Election Commissioner of India, Mr. Rajiv Kumar, we have his theme address. Mr. Rajiv Kumar is the 25th Chief Election Commissioner of India and brings with him extensive experience of more than 36 years, having worked in various ministries at the center and the state across social sector, environment and forests, human resources, finance and banking sector. During his tenure as the Election Commissioner, elections were held for state assemblies of Bihar in 2020 and in Assam, Kerala, Puducherry, Tamil Nadu, West Bengal in difficult times amidst the COVID concerns in March, April 2021, and also the elections to Goa, Manipur, Punjab, Uttarakhand, Uttar Pradesh very recently in early 2022. We thank Mr. Rajiv Kumar for leading the summit, and now I request him for his keynote address on the theme.
Thank you very much. Excellencies, chairpersons, presidents, chief election commissioners, members of the election management bodies, His Excellency Mr. Lorenzo, President Consular of INE of Mexico, other distinguished delegates from fellow election management bodies from Mexico, Mauritius, Maldives, Nepal, and Uzbekistan, representatives from Association of World Election Bodies, AWEB, IFES, International IDEA, colleagues from the Election Commission of India, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, namaskar to every one of you. I extend my very warm and cordial welcome to each one of you to Asia Regional Forum on the topic Making Elections Inclusive, Accessible and Participative. All the three key elements which are at the root of the democracy. And I believe that the subject of today's interaction cannot be more contemporary in the rapidly changing expectations of citizens across democracies as per their contextual felt needs. No democracy can ever be meaningful and aspirational unless it is inclusive for all of its citizens, accessible without fear or favor, and participative despite differential social, political, and economic vulnerabilities. As Mr. Lorenzo mentioned, the diversities. So these diversities range not only geographically but also in terms of their socio-political and economic deprivations or otherwise. The theme seamlessly integrates with the underlying philosophy of universal adult suffrage and also our theme, that is, no voter to be left behind. Friends, as father of our nation, Mahatma Gandhi said, and it's very apt for the subject, under democracy, and I quote, under democracy, even the weakest shall have the same opportunities as the strongest. This is what exactly is the topic, accessible, inclusive and participative. The very foundation of a democracy lies in the representation of all stakeholders and an indispensable part of national building starts with the inclusion of all in the stage of electoral processes to uphold the spirit of free and fair elections. And by all processes of elections we mean right from the word of registration. It's a registration of everyone who has attained the age of 18 seamlessly through as much as possible through the use of technology, his allocation to the booths, participation in every process, and transparently seeing every part of the election process so that it's a fair one and one can always believe in the results. So friends, democracy and democratic institutions flourish when all the groups of the people are fully represented. Every EMB across the world, whatever be its legal system or electoral procedures, tries its best to involve all citizens in voting, as this determines the credibility of the elections, make it meaningful. EMBs across the world have taken significant innovative measures to include all sections of society in their electoral process, to make the processes accessible and to facilitate and enhance the electoral participation of all categories of voters. Friends, this is the time that we need to appreciate these initiatives. As Mr. Lorenzo also mentioned, and I'll cover this in the later part, because of the ever-changing environment and the pressure on the democracies, it is the good initiatives of the various EMBs in the context in which they are taking in their respective countries need to be encouraged, need to be positively projected, and also the lessons learned from each other, despite the kind of serious legal and financial political constraints which the EMBs face in their respective jurisdictions. The fundamental precept of universal suffrage as a human right is enshrined in Universal Declaration of Human Rights 1948 and further fortified for inclusion by another UN instruments such as Convention on Rights for People with Disabilities and Convention on Elimination of Discrimination Against Women. So these three sections in particular have to be the target group and the focused group when we talk of the inclusion. Different countries have of course domesticated these treaties through their own statutes and administrative framework. And this is now incumbent upon the election management bodies to make this happen, which they are doing in any case, and to far more make it easier for them. And inclusion must cover all manner of marginalized communities. It's a diversity which is in every democracy, and those marginalized either by reason, geography, literacy, language, ethnicity, economy, gender, disability, among others, to ensure that their voices are as important as of the rest and they are heard. And they are able to express their voting rights without any fear and favor or even allurement. Access needs to be provided to these communities so that the process is entirely easy and comfortable. Then comes the question of ethical and inducement-free participation. Here, the menace of money power also is one mandate which most of the election management bodies tackle in their own way. The persons with disabilities and senior citizens also grapple with an attitudinal bias. Because of demographic changes in various societies and because of increasing life expectancy, we have a population which is elder and which wants to express itself in the voting process, in the electoral process. Friends, we in Election Commission of India believe strongly that whenever a new technology is designed or a new service is adopted by EMBs, accessibility should be part of the design itself and not added on later on as an afterthought. So its accessibility and inclusion is in itself very inclusive to all the policy decisions or the initiatives which we take. The word Make for Universal Access will go a long way in bringing senior citizens and PWCs into the electoral ecosystem. As I quoted Mahatma Gandhi, I would also like to, friends, quote Martin Luther King Jr. He once said, "If democracy is to have breadth of meaning, it is necessary to adjust inequalities. Addressing inequalities and inclusion requires legal, administrative, and technological changes to ensure data is collected on all matters of marginalized voters. On areas with low voter turnout, areas with hilly terrains, with geographical distances, and simultaneously mapping the marginalized communities who need support in terms of outreach and in terms of even participation." Friends, outreach to these communities can only be meaningfully taken up when the data, according to their regions and their deprivations, is captured in the system. We at ECI have been working on ensuring every voter counts and all voices are heard long before COVID-19. And since the pandemic, we have taken extra efforts to push for accessibility and inclusion. It is hard to believe today that a few years ago, we didn't even know how many PWD voters existed in the country. More than 7.7 million PWD voters and around 15 million electors above the age of 80 plus have been mapped now during the pandemic and thereafter. We are constantly striving towards achieving 100% mapping of all the PWD voters of the country and also all the senior citizens who are 80 plus. We have now, in the revision of electoral rolls, created fields in the databases that the 80 plus PWDs, transgenders are separately earmarked, and booth wise, constituency wise, one can find out the exact number so that you can do a facilitation and you can also do the outreach. The participation of women in the first election, India, friends, in India was 78 million, that was 45%. And in 7 decades and 17 national elections later, women's participation has exceeded that of men, and gender gap has not only closed but reversed to plus 0.17% in 2019. Women voted more than men in India in the 2019 general election. So thus India witnessed 235% increase in female electors since 1971. How do we translate various commitments to reality in action? One of the most far-sighted reform that we have undertaken and which is widely appreciated is about the postal ballot facility, which has been extended to all the senior citizens of the age 80 plus and all the PWD voters. So there is a information which is given in each assembly and in each booth by an officer who goes to every village, conveying that this is a form available. If you want to come to the election booth, you are most welcome. Otherwise, we'll come to your place and facilitate you to cast your vote from the comfort of your home. This is a facility, and very interestingly, very encouragingly, many of the citizens who are 80 plus also prefer to come to the booth rather than voting it from their house. That's a very welcome change which we notice, because it's a festive mahal, it's a festive environment in which they want to come forward. This system has now been implemented in 11 state elections to the 11 provinces, and with the perfect health protocols in close to 6.6 million polling stations. Friends, the scope of postal ballot have also need to be extended. The time has come to those who suffer large scale migrations because of the pandemic. People move from one locality to another and then back to various other places depending on the menace of pandemic in those particular locations where they are working. And it becomes difficult for them to return to their polling stations in any case during the voting, especially the marginalized ones. So time is very ripe now that combinedly the election management bodies world over find solutions to the facilitation of the migrant voters to cast vote from wherever they are. This of course requires massive technological innovations for a multi-post and a multi-constituency voting instruments, and also a broad political consensus. The political consensus, if one has to go through the blockchain, becomes all the more difficult because the votes pass through the electronic medium. Having said that, the technological answers are possible to address the differential vulnerabilities of various sections, be it in the inaccessible area or migrants or PWDs or senior citizens. Friends, I would like to mention about the role of the free media, which also is critical in ensuring the free access and ensuring inclusion at every stage of the process. They, in our case especially, every process is transparent, and at every process we give permission to all the political parties to watch it and also to the media to watch it. And therefore, we get enriched and benefited by the continuous grievances and the redressal system. There are technological solutions which can help, which enables anybody to make a complaint through their mobiles, in which the geotagging is done, location is fixed, photo is uploaded, and our system guarantees that in 90 minutes time that person, our team will reach there and person will get a report, a written report as to what happened, was your complaint genuine or not genuine, and whether we have taken action and what action. And in this, the role of media is extremely important. Friends, in order to ensure that all voices are heard and there is a level playing field for the participation in the electoral process, the media for booth wise is given access in the system which we follow. However, I would like to mention that because of the diversities and because of the huge expectations and because of the keen contestations, the ever increasing outreach through social media has new opportunities and new challenges, and it assumes criticality in these times to address some of the challenges of fake news, of narratives, of surrogate kind of advertising, and so many other things which it brings with it. There are legal and regulatory frameworks, and we are aware of its limitation across the geographies, but in order to ensure the inclusiveness and the participation and ethical elections, one need to also have a legal and regulatory frame which is evolving for the social media. Democracy as a form of governance undoubtedly serves larger public good, promote welfare, equity and inclusion of all groups of the society, including disadvantaged and vulnerable people. Core of democracy involves people's participation in governance through free and fair elections. While most of us take this understanding and conclusion given, it is also a reality that democracies today are facing criticism and attacks from those systems who are not following the democratic systems. The pressure of performance, reconciling the diverse voices, fighting the narratives which gets created and which gets traction and become wild within a short time. The democracies are facing challenges, serious challenges. And therefore, it's a historic moment, no doubt, but it's also is a critical moment where democracy as an institution quickly caters within the geographies to make every voice heard, make it participative. Otherwise, the gap in the expectation which the citizens have and the achievements which are always not matching is nothing but a discontentment. The participative system of governance in democracy may seem to be taking time in decision making because it's consultative, it's participatory, even after the governments are formed. But it's a very robust system of factoring in every voice, even if it is slightly delayed. But then, in today's scenario, it faces the pressure of performance because the decisions can be taken faster in other forms of governance. While I'll also like to mention one more aspect here, that while we all understand need for self-evaluation and improvement of systems to deal with the challenges and meet changing expectations of our citizens, the framework of such self-correction should be non-judgmental. Because all democracies in any case are passing through, are facing challenges in different varying orders and on a matrix which is very, very varying. All of us reflect a wide diversity of jurisdictional and historic context. Thus, assessment and so-called ratings which keep coming about the democracies need to factor in magnitude, socio-cultural and geographical context, and should not be designed as negative frameworks, but should instead celebrate success of each democracy, each EMB, and the test should be not that where they are, the test should be how much of effort is being made by the respective jurisdictions and the EMBs, rather than, because one negative comment tends to undo what the EMBs or the democracies in their respective jurisdictions achieve. Integration of election and democracy go hand in hand and generate global peace, prosperity and stability. The idea of Summit for Democracy is thus a very welcome move, and Election Commission of India forcefully and wholeheartedly supports it. Esteemed participants, we are looking forward to hear and learn from you during the day, and I am confident that deliberations in this session will immensely add to the body of literature and help through sharing of innovative and best practices in universally achieving inclusiveness in all aspects and processes of democracy, social, political, economic, environmental, whatever. We need to work together and towards eradicating all barriers to inclusive elections and ensure all voices are heard. We are also willing to share whatever experiences we have, either in terms of technology or legal or regulatory frameworks or 80 plus or PWDs or transparency generals and modules, in whatever way anybody wants to get us from us. And equally, we are also very eager to learn from the experiences of all of you, which are extremely important for us to integrate and further improve our systems. I wish a very warm welcome to all of you again, and also wish that the deliberations would be very fruitful and would make this world really democratic, which means every voice is heard, every vulnerable voice is heard, every differential vulnerability is addressed, and we strongly feel, being one of the oldest democratic institutions in the country, that that's the best way of resolving issues and furthering peace and harmony in the society. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir, for your perspective and also the vision and the approach of the Election Commission of India towards making our elections more inclusive, accessible and participative and ethical. And thank you very much for your very enriching and guiding views. So once again, thank you to the Excellencies for this very fabulous start to the proceedings. And with that, we now approach our first technical session. This technical session is on the theme Inclusive Elections, Enhancing Participation of Youth, Gender and Citizens in Remote Areas. I welcome our esteemed co-chairs as they take center stage. His Excellency Mr. Mohammed Irfan Abdul Rahman, Honorable Electoral Commissioner of Mauritius, Her Excellency Dr. Janaki Kumari Tuladhar, Election Commissioner of Nepal, and our three esteemed presenters, Mr. Antonio Spinelli from the International Ideas Asia, Ms. Esmeralda Muraladra from Philippines, and Mr. Siong Riol Kim from AWEB. I request all of you to please have your cameras on. So we begin with the opening remarks of our co-chairs, and may I first request His Excellency Mr. Mohammed Irfan Abdul Rahman, Honorable Electoral Commissioner of Mauritius, to make his opening statement. Excellency Mr. Rahman has practiced as barrister in different courts in Mauritius, specializing both in the civil and commercial law, and has served as magistrate, district magistrate in various judicial offices. He was appointed as the Electoral Commissioner of Mauritius on the 17th of January 1998. He has led several observer missions during elections held in Seychelles, Namibia, and Liberia. I hand over now the floor to Excellency Mr. Rahman for his opening remarks.
Namaskar. Thank you very much. Greetings from Mauritius. Honorable President Councillor Lorenzo Vianello, INE Mexico. Excellency Sri Rajiv Kumar, Honorable CEC, ECI India. Excellencies, chairpersons of EMBs, and colleagues from Mexico, the Maldives, Nepal, and Uzbekistan, and also our dear colleagues from AWEB, International IDEA, and IFES. Before I would start my chairing of this session, may I, Excellency Sri Rajiv Kumar, please allow me, in the name of my office, in my own personal name, to express my profound and heartfelt congratulations to you on your recent appointment as the 25th CEC of ECI India. Excellency, your appointment bears testimony of your immense contribution to the Republic of India across several ministries of the Centre and State Cadre, more especially in the finance and banking sector. We salute you, Honorable Sri Rajiv Kumar. Dear colleagues, it is indeed my privilege on this auspicious occasion of the Indian festival of Raksha Bandhan to co-chair this session, enhancing participation of the youth, gender and citizens in remote areas. I'm delighted to convey my very good wishes to you and your families on this very auspicious day. As some of you may know, Raksha Bandhan is an important festival that falls on Rakhi Purnima and celebrates the very essence of life, human bond, relationships, and a sense of togetherness. As EMBs, it is the same values that are our guiding principles and bring us together as sister electoral management bodies. In these difficult and testing times, we must commend INE Mexico and the Election Commission of India, more particularly the President Councillor of INE and the Honorable CEC, Sri Rajiv Kumar, for bringing EMBs across the globe together, just as the Festival of Rakhi brings a message of togetherness in the world. We have a very interesting theme, enhancing participation of youth, gender, and citizens in remote areas. The growing non-participation of the youth in the democratic and electoral process is a matter of concern worldwide and more especially to us EMBs. Should this trend continue, it could have serious implications in the very foundation of democracy itself. So the question that arises, what is the way forward? How to combat the decline in engagement in the electoral process and youth apathy generally? As we know, women's participation in the political and electoral process is still posing a huge challenge in many parts of the world. Women still sadly face obstacles to participation, such as discrimination, risk of violence, fear of stigmatization, and other factors. So, quotas, training, and more importantly, measures for the selection of candidates can contribute to increasing their participation. It is also a well-known fact that the rate of voter participation in election by people living in remote areas is lower than the national average, and this ultimately could affect the legitimacy of an election. How this issue should be addressed by EMBs to make sure that citizens living in remote areas are enrolled as electors and then subsequently encouraged to vote at elections. We all agree that non-participation by an important segment of the population must be a matter of concern to us EMBs. Having set the backdrop to this very interesting session, may I now have the privilege to introduce my lost brother of many years, Antonio Spinelli. He's smiling on the screen. We've worked together in many countries. Masalama, Antonio. Mr. Spinelli is the senior advisor of International IDEA, and I have had the privilege of working with him in the past. I also have the pleasure to introduce Mr. Kamal Bhattarai, Undersecretary. I'm sorry, it is Mrs. Esmeralda Ladra, Director, Comelec Philippines, and also my co-chair, Dr. Janaki Kumari Tuladhar, Honorable Election Commissioner of Nepal, who will be co-chairing this session. And finally, our very distinguished colleague from AWEB Secretariat, Mr. Sen Riol Kim. I think I've spoken enough for this afternoon. May I now hand over the floor to Mr. Antonio Spinelli, International IDEA.
Thank you. Hello, can you hear me? Hello?
So we can hear you. Your voice is slightly breaking.
Okay. I'll start. So I was saying good afternoon, namaskar, and buenas tardes. On behalf of International IDEA, I would like to state that it's a great privilege to be part of this event with long-time partners like ECI and INES, but also with long-time friends of other EMBs that are also present today. In the interest of time, I'll move straight into my presentation. I think that most of us will agree if I state that today elections are confronting turbulent times. Challenges, threats, and emergencies that just a few years ago didn't exist are now constantly emerging, affecting, as in many other sectors, also the delivery of inclusive, accessible, and participatory elections, which is the topic of our event. So if we look at these challenges, we can see how most of them are bearing profound and direct implication on equal electoral access and participation. For example, if we look at context affected by political polarization, which is being increasingly exploited and exacerbated by populist leaders for opportunistic scopes and political gains. Or if we look at context with deeply divided electorates, where political, social, or ideological fractures are conducive to close election results where a handful of votes can determine or even swing an electoral outcome, or even worse, can make it vulnerable to be easily challenged and delegitimized. Or if we look at contexts that are affected by growing political disillusion and dissatisfactions with long-ruling political elites that have systematically failed to deliver their promises, and they are triggering unprecedented apathy and declining levels of voter turnout. Finally, we can also look at contexts affected by the COVID-19 pandemic, limiting safe access to the voting process, thereby excluding from the franchise segment of the electorate that are at higher risks from being exposed to the virus and its constantly evolving strains. So election after election, EMBs, electoral management bodies, are under increased pressure as to how they can maximize the participation of eligible voters in their electoral processes and how to ensure greater accessibility, but also greater equity in voting. In a healthy democracy, all those eligible to vote enjoy equitable access to the electoral franchise and the right to vote without discrimination. And this is explicitly set out in human rights treaties whose compliance is binding for signatory states and governments. So while there can be restrictions on who can vote in an election, these restrictions must be based on objective and reasonable criteria. For example, it is reasonable to restrict the right to vote to citizens of a country or to those who are over 18 years old. On the other hand, it would be unreasonable to restrict the right to vote on grounds on physical disability, of literacy level, educational standards, or property requirements. It may also be unreasonable to exclude eligible voters as a consequence of their whereabouts or the remoteness of the locations in which they reside, or whether they have mobility limitations, such in the case of elderly and infirm voters, or if they are instead highly on the move, such in the case of migrants. If we think about it, it is somehow surprising to realize that in the midst of the 21st century, in many jurisdictions, the right to vote in an election of citizens who are young or citizens live in rural or remote areas, citizens that have a disability or belong to an indigenous community, how they can still how can still be unfairly restricted as a consequence of legal or practical matters. In particular, voters residing in remote areas are still facing numerous obstacles to registering to vote and casting their ballots. Often due to large distances and the remoteness of the locations they live in, the most simple commutes may take days, if not weeks. While these remote communities are used to severe mobility limitations, their geographical isolation may impinge on their fundamental right of having their vote cast and counted. So against this background, the limitation to formulate its corrective strategies aiming to provide an equitable and cost-effective access to voting for these isolated populations, the EMB can start by identifying first which particular segments of these marginalized electorates are excluded from the franchise, and second, what is actually affecting their participation. So for simplicity of our analysis today, inhibitors to equal electoral access and participation can be clustered into what I define as motivational factors and contextual barriers. Motivational factors drive voters to deliberately abstain from participating in an election. So in this case, their non-participation is a self-imposed one. Abstention typically manifests itself through indifference or apathy towards voting. And with time, indifference prompts voters to perceive little or no difference among political alternatives that are available to them. And also, with the electoral outcome no longer mattering to them, indifferent voters gradually become less and less likely to vote, and their presence at the polling station is more sporadic. Indifference, in worst cases, can degenerate in alienation, where a hopeless sense of resignation makes voting for these voters a meaningless act, leaving them with the only option of keeping away from the ballot box. For the EMB, helping different alienated voters to regain trust in the value of their vote could be almost an insurmountable task. Often the type of efforts that are required to address factors that have triggered long and profound disillusionment in these voters may transcend the mandate of the EMB, its scope of work, and may be outside its direct sphere of control or its capacities, particularly when these factors are deeply rooted in the country's historical, social, cultural, democratic, political, and electoral fabric. In such cases, unless a major consensual and convincing process of genuine political and electoral reform or a credible alternation of political power takes place, the EMB could only have a limited ability to win back the minds and the confidence of disillusioned electors. In seeking to address these motivational factors that prompted its electors to relinquish their voting rights, the EMB strategies can be geared towards advocating for genuine reforms to strengthen the integrity of future electoral processes. So to be a credible driver of change, the EMB has to assert its role and reputation, or to reassert them if they are eroded, as a trusted electoral management body that is guided by core principles of independence, impartiality, integrity, transparency, efficiency, professionalism, and service-mindedness. Moving to contextual barriers, they are confronted by those electors who instead, while fully believing in the value of their vote and wanting to uphold it, they are excluded from the franchise for circumstances that are occurring against their will. Unlike indifferent and alienated voters, such exclusion is instead inflicted to them by a host of contextual barriers that inhibit their equal electoral participation, and they limit their access to the franchise. So when it comes to voters residing in geographically remote or inaccessible areas, these contextual barriers may include physical obstacles, such as an arduous terrain, poor or impassable roads, geographic isolation, large distances to the closest polling stations. They could include lack of suitable infrastructures in these areas, lack of assets or resources, or even of traditional addresses where such isolated voters could be reached. There could be stark technological divide, where communities in these areas struggle to have access to radio, TV, internet, or mobile phone communications, and so they are deprived of basic information they need to choose their candidates. There could be inadequate levels of voter information or of access to voter information due to weak or limited dissemination, to language barriers, to low levels of literacy, and to other social, ethnic, cultural, or political limitations. And finally, there could be a volatile security environment, political intimidation, violence, or conflict that limit the ability of the EMB to serve voters residing in these areas. So To address contextual barriers inhibiting equal and electoral access and participation in such areas, the EMB can instead play a stronger role by advocating for or undertaking genuine reform of the normative or procedural framework of elections, by enhancing the quality and reach of voter information education, by strengthening administrative and operational aspects of the elections, and by increasing the number of polling stations and ensuring their greater physical accessibility, by introducing special measures to deliver more convenient voting services to such populations without lowering the required levels of integrity of the process, and by enhancing transparency and introducing security measures. Ultimately, reaching small numbers of voters in the remote areas may seem a gigantic task for a limited outcome, but it shows the EMB's commitment to all its electoral stakeholders to ensure that every vote actually counts, no matter from how remotely that vote is cast. While in an election with millions of voters, the power of a single ballot is infinitesimally small, every single vote counts, as it is the amalgamation of each and every ballot that has been cast in that elections that determines its outcome. Perhaps, to close, not all EMBs may succeed to overcome all motivational and contextual barriers limiting their ability to deliver inclusive, accessible, and participatory elections. However, by devising these corrective strategies and putting them into action, EMBs can endeavor, if not to reverse, at least to contain steadily declining trends in voter turnout, and they can succeed to help their excluded electorates to regain their voice and mostly their trust in their value, the value of their vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Spinelli, for your views and ideas. And I now invite our next speaker, Ms. Esmeralda Muraladra, Director of Planning in the Commission on Elections in the Philippines at Manila. Ms. Ladra has extensive experience and domain knowledge of various aspects of election management. She's also held the position of the Chief Operating Officer, Acting Secretary of the Association of Asian Election Authorities during the tenure of Comilac as the Chair of AAEA from November 2017 to May 2022. I request and invite Ms. Ladra for her talk.
Good afternoon, Your Honors, Your Excellencies, and our highly esteemed colleagues in my fellow election management bodies and our fellow participants in this Asian Regional Forum. This is a presentation from the Commission on Elections, Republic of the Philippines, on inclusive elections, enhancing participation of youth, gender, and citizens in remote areas. I hope you are now seeing my presentation. The Commission and Bank at present is composed of the Chairman, Honorable George Erwin M. Garcia, the Honorable Commissioner Socorro Binting, Honorable Commissioner Marlon S. Casquejo, Honorable Commissioner Amy P. Ferolino, and Honorable Commissioner Free E. Bulay. The COMELEC has a mission statement in our COMELEC strategic plan for 2017 to 2022, and that is in pursuance, of course, to our mandated task under our Philippine Constitution, Article 9C. And our mission statement states, as vanguards of democracy, we conduct free, orderly, honest, peaceful, credible, gender responsive, and socially inclusive elections in active partnership with election stakeholders. For the May 2022 national and local elections, which was conducted on May 9, 2022, we had to conduct the elections under the pandemic, and the Commission endeavored to conduct it with Vote Safe Philippines as its brand. SAFE as an acronym on the secure, accurate, free, and fair elections.
Ms.
One of the best
Ladra, sorry to
practices.
intervene. Ma'am, we can't see your presentation. Probably you will have to put it on from your end.
Okay, let me share again.
Yeah, now it's now we can see.
Now you can see. Thank you very
Yeah,
much.
thank you, ma'am.
Okay. Maybe I shall continue or start?
Please continue.
Let me continue. Okay. For the May 2022 national and local elections, which we conducted, endeavored to conduct a Vote Safe Philippines as our brand. SAFE as an acronym to secure, accurate, free, and fair elections. One of the best practices that we took note of is that we established offices for the vulnerable sectors, including the indigenous people, which we consider as members or who belong to the cultural minorities. And these are the people actually who are citizens in the remote areas of the registration that we conducted. For the IPs or the indigenous peoples, we have a special office for them, which we call Vulnerable Sectors Office. And this office includes to cater the needs of the persons with disabilities, senior citizens, persons deprived of liberty. And for the women, we had the Gender and Development Office, which is supervised by the GAD focal point system. This is to ensure that the needs of our voters who belong to the vulnerable sectors will also be addressed, especially insofar as the accessibility, inclusivity, and participative elections are concerned. Per our comparative sex disaggregated statistical data, we can see that our youth voters is composed of 31.9% of the total registered voters in the entire country, with female voters comprising the majority at 50.78%, and the male voters comprising 49.22%. So there are more female registered voters than male insofar as the youth are concerned. For the women, we also took note of the fact that there are more female voters than male voters. So the female voters comprises in 2022 51.20%, and the male voters at 48.82%, or a difference of 2.4%. And we also tried to compare it with the 4 other previous elections and see that there is an average difference between the male and female voters of 2.44%. On the overseas voting, we also have more female voters at 63.17%, while male voters was only 36.83%. On the participation of our voters, the voting turnout in 2022, we can see that it's at 84.10%, the highest among the 5 national and local elections that we have so far conducted. 5 automated national and local elections. So at 84.10%, the male voters comprises 84.10%, while the female voters comprises 84.09%. So we can see that there were more male voters who actually voted than the female at a difference of 0.01%. So that we can see also in this slide that there is an average difference between voters who actually voted, male versus female, at 0.75% when we compare the 5 electoral exercises from 2010. As candidates, there are few women who run in elections than men. So from 2010 up to 2022, 5 automated elections, we noticed that our females actually had only fewer percentage to run as candidates. In 2022, it was at 20.57%, while the male candidates was noted at 79.43%. But even if there were few women who ran as candidates, those increase in percentage of these women from 2010 to 2022 was also noted. So from 2010, there was an increase from 16.65%, and the increasing trend up to 2022 was at 20.57%, or an average for the 5 elections, 0.98%. For those who win in the elections, women candidates comprised 23.26%, while the male candidates who won in the elections was at 76.74%. So you will note at right on the indigenous persons, which I said a while ago, that is those people who are residing in remote areas in our country, and they belong to the cultural minorities. Our number of registered voters and turnout will tell us that there is also an increasing participation and inclusivity on their part. So from 2016 to 2022, there is an increase in the total number of registered voters and in the turnout, although in 2022 elections, we still have a partial report as of August 10, and we are expecting that the voter turnout for the indigenous persons or IPs will also be at an increased percentage. All this, the statistical data, we would like to share the things that we did as our best practices in order to promote inclusivity. So our best practices and initiatives for the youth. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So for the youth, we have bills seeking to integrate voter ed in the junior and senior high school curricula. So we have different bills, and in fact, in some parts of our country, we already had curricula where voter education in the junior and senior high school are already being included. We also have an approval in our proposed budget for voter education and information, the activities for the youth. And the conduct of the No Elections Better seminar in the different schools and universities. Now we call it Gender Inclusivity in Elections, or GESIS, in various schools. Next slide, please. For women, we also have our inclusion of gender in our strategic plan. as we have already stated in our mission statement, and our strategies are also part of the strategic pillars which we have been implementing since 2017 up to 2022. Next slide, please. So we also have included a strategy, our gender responsive planning, budgeting, and utilization of the budget that has been given to the Commission. So from 2019 to 2022, you would take note that there has been an increasing trend also of our budget utilization for purposes of addressing the needs of women in elections. And now for this year, in 2022 national and local elections, we have a budget approved by our Philippine Commission on Women at 89.23%, the highest so far of the Commission. Next slide, please. For the next slide, you will see that we have been the chairman of AAEA, or the Association of Asian Election Authorities, for 5 years, from 2017 up to last May 5 or 7, 2022. And during the time of our chairpersonship, we have included in our program, in all the executive board meetings and general assemblies that we conducted, the reporting of gender mainstreaming and social inclusiveness in elections. And on May 2022, General Assembly, the reporting on the gender issues and concerns in elections, the actions taken, and the recommended solutions. The next slide, please. The next slide is on the partnership and coordination with different international NGOs like IFES, UNDP, ASEAN, and others in conducting fora, capacity building programs, and other projects, such as the hosting of the joint UN-ASEAN Bridge Electoral Observation Workshop and roundtable discussion for 1 day in the promotion of women's participation in electoral and political processes, including through election observation. And then we also have active support and participation to national and international GAD events, or gender and development events, and webinars spearheaded and or conducted by the Philippine Commission on Women. Next slide, please. So these are some of our activities also in gender and development. Next slide, please. We have also conducted special registration for women. We have to ensure that there is a vow-free community. So we had a vow-free activities in November. That's the 18-day campaign. We also have the men supporting our movement. That's the men opposed to violence against women in elections. And we also have special registration for men. And of course, the different online consultations with our GAD focal point system members, together with our very own executive committee chairperson of gender and development, the Honorable Commissioner in Team. Next slide is the conduct of survey on the barriers that hinder the political participation of women. So we were able to identify, based on the survey, that there is a need for the capacity building of our aspirants. The previous slide, please. Previous slide, please. Previous slide, please. Can we have the previous slide? The slide before. So on the barriers that we have conducted, the survey says that there is a need for capacity building program for our aspiring candidates or women who would like to. The next slide, please. We already had that. So it's the number 11 strategy. The next slide. And our survey says that we also need to give support to those aspiring women candidates so that they would be encouraged to run in the elections. And stereotyping is also one of those identified as a barrier. The next slide before that, please. And another strategy is the conduct of WES, or the Women in Election Seminar. Now, the previous two slides. The previous two slides, please. The previous slide. Yes, that's the one. Okay, thank you. So, stereotyping is also one of the barriers that was identified to hinder the political participation of women. And we are trying to address that in the activities that we have enumerated in our God Plan on Budget, which were already approved by our Philippine Commission on Women. Then the conduct of WES, or Women in Election Seminar, we call it now GERIS, or the Gender Responsive Elections Seminar nationwide, including our Bangsamoro women. Then we have the conduct of the No Elections Better Seminar, now the JESIS, for the high school junior and senior students. The conduct of Forum on Sexual Orientation and Gender Identity Expression, or the SOGI, the God-related webinars and fora, the publication of God magazine, newsletters, and maintenance in our collected site of the God portal and the God Facebook account. Next slide, please. We also publish and disseminate to our very own internal COMELEC employees gender-sensitive information and education campaign materials. Like during registration, we have this Our Vote, Our Voice, or Your Vote, Your Voice, register to vote. Then all these IEC materials have been distributed also to our different regional offices and all offices in the country. For the next slide.
Ma'am, just a request, if you can kindly rush through your slides. We are really hard pressed on time.
Okay. We will be finished in a few minutes. The provision of gender-sensitive facilities, the organization of CODI, the establishment of our God Policy Studies Group, and the conduct of the lecture series. Next slide, please. And other efforts, we give incentives to our political parties with women agenda, and to ensure full access to registration for women, we also let the child care center in the different barangays and different localities open during election day, so that women can go to their polling places and vote, while the children can be taken care of at the child care center. Our incentives, next please. Our incentives includes the giving of awards, like the Wonder Woman Award, a recognition to an independent candidate who won in the election. The Amazon Award, an independent woman candidate who did not win in the elections, but we are encouraging them to run and try again in future elections. The Superwoman Award, that is for the unopposed woman candidate. And then the next slide, the search for outstanding political party, where the political party which fielded the highest number of women candidates from positions from the municipal level to the senatorial level, and has run a gender-sensitive campaign with no reported violation in any campaign rules and regulations. Then we also give Gender Quota Award for a political party, which had a gender quota using the PCW recommended 40-60% formula, wherein neither male or female candidates comprises less than 40%, nor more than 60% in the number of candidates. And then the Women's Campaign Fund Award, a party who has spent 50% of its legally allowable expenditures to its women candidates and or programs, activities, and projects for gender and development or women agenda pursuant to their political platform. Next slide, please. We also requested all embassies and other consular offices which conducted our elections during election day in voting centers for the overseas voters to also provide reasonable accommodation like express lane, waiting area, with seats and other accessibility features for persons with disabilities and pregnant women, and a room for lactation, diaper change, or a place where children can be entrusted under the care of our office staff akin to a daycare center. The mandatory and strict observance of our offices of election officers on a policy on inclusivity and non-discriminatory process of registration, the promotion of gender equality and sensitivity, and the observance of cultural practices and ethnic traditions. Next slide, please. We also require, as I've said, the opening of daycare centers during election day and the setting of the protocols in the processing and releasing of voter certification, where we institutionalize the new normal protocols. Next slide, please. We also set protocols in the conduct of our continuing registration, and we also have actively participated in the deliberations and the submission of position papers on bills concerning political participation of women and God-related bills. On IP registration, the committee also would like to empower the IP in the electoral process with the coordination with the field officials. Next slide, please. With the field officials for the conduct of satellite registrations in IP communities when we resumed our registration. And these registrations were coupled with community consultations wherein IP leaders were invited to share their concerns on registration and voting day. And we have, aside from the IP registration week, next slide, please, the integration of sensitivity training module in trainings for field officials nationwide so that they would be able to know how to relate and attend to the needs of the IPs during election day. And of course, we improved our IP voting modules. The next slide is the institutionalization of our special polling places or SPPs. These are the accessible voting centers were also provided, and these polling places were especially dedicated to our IP voters, so they would not be voting in regular precincts. So the AVCs, or the accessible voting centers, are established in the localities or the communities where IPs are residing, and the SPPs, or special polling places, are established in the existing voting center exclusively devoted to IP voters. We also have the clustering scheme on existing IP established centers with a minimum of 150 IP voters, where our BCMs were also provided to them so that they can also have an automated elections. So 33 ABCs and 33 SPPs were established in our 2022 national and local elections. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. We also conducted sensitivity training and voter education for IP voters. Next slide, please. So thank you very much. That was all my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am.
We are sorry for the delay.
Yeah, thank you, ma'am, for sharing the best practices and initiatives and actions being taken for elections in Philippines. And I now request our next speaker, Mr. Seong Riol Kim, Advisor to the Secretary General of the Association of World Election Bodies. As a political scientist, Mr. Kim's research interests cover many aspects of politics, including democratization, electoral politics, nationalism, and international cooperation in the field of elections. He is assisting the Secretary General AWEB in developing new projects and making policies. He's also a member of the editorial board of the AWEB India Journal of Elections. Over to Mr. Kim, and just a request to kindly adhere to the time of 12 to 15 minutes of presentation. Thank you.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. My name is Sung Kim. I'm working for the Secretariat of AWEB, and I'm very glad to join the Asian Regional Forum of Electoral Democracy, hosted by Election Commission of India. We know this regional forum is taking place as part of the Global Summit for Democracy to be held in September this year in Mexico. The AEF Secretariat also took part in the European Regional Forum as a co-leader, which was successfully held this June. I would like to thank Election Commission of India for giving me this great opportunity to do a presentation. And I'm sure that, like many other events, ECI has hosted, this forum will prove to be another resounding success. Inclusive elections. In the interest of time, my presentation will be focused on enhancing women's participation in election and politics. The issue of low participation of women in election and politics has been discussed many times in many seminars and many conferences. Thanks to these continuous efforts, we see some progress being made in some parts of the world. Having said that, in many parts of the world, the ways women participate in election and politics are still limited. Voters still have conservative mindsets and conservative culture in terms of gender role. And also there are still many social factors that discourage women's electoral and political participation. To begin with, women's low participation. Why is this a problem? Political scientist David Eason defines politics as the authoritative allocation of values. There are many kinds of values in our society, such as wealth, power, and status, and everyone wants to take them. So therefore, properly distributing values is very important. And the question is, who should distribute the values? We choose our representatives, such as the president and parliamentary members, through elections and give them our authority to properly allocate values. If the representative takes a particular group's side, he or she can properly distribute values. In a society with several ethnic groups, for example, if most of the representatives come from a particular ethnic group, allocating values to the other groups won't be easy. Likewise, if men take most representation in a society, allocating values to women won't be easy. According to the Inter-Parliamentary Union's statistics about the percentage of women in national parliament, South Korea, where I am from, ranks the 112th seat. Out of 295 members of the parliament, 18%, which is 55, are women. And the United States ranks the 69th with 28%. Japan ranks the 165th with around 10%. So it is undeniable that women's representation is low. And because of this, it is highly likely for women to get disadvantaged in terms of the allocation of values. So what should we do then? Let's first look at systemic changes. So we may have to make some changes to the existing election system in order to enhance women's electoral and political participation. Let's look at 4 common ways which may be found in some countries but not in other countries. First, the ratio of women candidates from a political party can be legally guaranteed. So if a political party failed to register a certain number of women candidates, the election commission may refuse to receive the entire registration of the party candidates. At the same time, financial inducement can be provided to a party to nominate more women candidates. So the more women candidates a party nominates, the more political funds go to the party. Secondly, we may consider changing a constituency-oriented candidacy application system to a specialty area-oriented candidacy application system. This means that a political party wants to nominate a candidate who is likely to win in a constituency. In many cases, the candidate is a man. So this man applies to the political party for candidacy in this particular constituency. Maybe this man comes from this constituency or has been a well-known figure in this constituency for a long time. So therefore, in a constituency-oriented candidacy application system, the party will nominate this man for this particular constituency. But if the party adopts a specialty area-oriented candidacy application system, people apply for their areas of expertise to be a candidate of the party. This means that the party receives applications from people who have their expertise in important policy issues such as environment, welfare, or education. Based on the level of expertise in each area, the party chooses its candidates and nominates the best candidates for the constituencies. The party is likely to win regardless of the gender of the candidate. In other words, the party chooses the applicant's expertise over the applicant's privilege in a particular constituency. Thirdly, many women are reluctant to compete in a party candidacy election because of the high cost. In order to minimize women's financial burden when competing in a party candidacy election, we may consider introducing a publicly financed election system for party candidacy. So this system is a form of party candidacy election financing designed to meet the cost of all or most election campaign activities from a publicly managed fund. Lastly, we may also consider increasing both the entire number of the seats decided by the proportional representation system and the quota for women on the list as party candidates to be elected in the proportional representation system. So it is important to increase the entire number of the seats decided by the proportional representation system, even if the quota for women on the list of party candidates is increased, say 20% to 60%. But if the entire number of the seats by the proportional representation system is still small, the increased quota for women doesn't mean much. We looked at 4 common ways to bring some changes to the existing system. But these are not fundamental solutions to the lack of women's participation in politics and election. They are artificial and temporary solutions. They are top-down and artificial ways of matching an ideal point and the reality of a society. So they are not a natural byproduct of social development. Moreover, implementing the changes takes time and money. Of course, to some extent, we may have to use some artificial solutions at an early stage because it's hard to reduce the gap in the number of seats between men and women in a short time. Those artificial solutions may function as the priming water for the increase in women's political participation. But the problem is the effect of those artificial solutions may not last long. It would be good if those artificial solutions create a virtuous cycle of women's political participation. But in a male-oriented society, those artificial ways are likely to further increase the gap between idea and reality. So because they only give women formal representation instead of actual representation. So a representative example of this is Rwanda. According to the Interparliamentary Union statistics, Rwanda ranks the first in terms of the percentage of women in national parliament. 60%, 49 out of 80 members of parliament are women. But how about women's social status in Rwanda? So do you think it's as high as the percentage of women in national parliament? So the answer is no, because it wasn't based on large demand of women, but a man's top-down decision that the political and electoral system was introduced. So President Kagame established a new constitution in 2003, guaranteeing quota for women members of parliament. So if this top-down systemic change is not a fundamental solution to the lack of women's participation, what should we do? So I think we should have a two-track strategy. In the short term, a top-down policy may be effective, but it's temporary. So I think we also need to take a long-term bottom-up approach as well, which is socio-economic participation. So countries in North Europe, like Norway, Sweden, Finland, and Denmark, can be an example of showing that women's economic participation leads to their political and electoral participation. What they have in common is they are providing a lot of support for women's participation in economic activities. So they are operating a quota system for women board members and executives in a company. They also seem to understand that in order to support women's socio-economic participation, women's role in the family should be changed. For example, the Norwegian government has increased the number of nursery facilities for children for the last 50 years from 250 to over 6,000, making the full payment for child support expense. So as a result, over 90% of the children in Norway are being taken care of at those facilities. The number of women parliament members in Norway is 76 out of 169, which is 45%, and 45% for Finland, and 46% for Sweden. So in conclusion, the low participation of women in election and politics is a problem because they are likely to be excluded from the allocation of values. Women should be able to secure their representation in the area of election and politics. So we may consider changing the existing system to make this happen. But at the same time, this top-down systematic change is only a temporary solution. We should also find long-term ways to make this happen at the same time. This is all that I have prepared for my presentation. But before wrapping it up, I would like to remind all AM members present here of the 5th General Assembly meeting of AWEB to be held in South Africa from October 17 to October 22. I hope to see you all at the General Assembly meeting in Cape Town. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kim. Thank you for your very valuable suggestions on increasing women participation in elections. And with that, we open the floor for the discussions. I would like to request our Honorable Chair, Excellency Mr. Rahman, to please drive these discussions.
Thank you very much. We have had very informative and interesting presentations from Antonio, from Mrs. Esmeralda, and lastly from Mr. Kim. I think we have had a very good overview of the challenges facing us on the issue of participation of youth, of gender, and citizens in remote areas. It was a very interesting presentation from all three distinguished presenters. And for us now is to decide on the way forward as EMBs, what are the measures to be put in place so that we can find out what the reasons behind the disconnect between the youth and the political establishment, as mentioned briefly by Antonio in his presentation. But on the same wavelength, I think we have to commend the Philippines Electoral Commission, COMELEC, for various initiatives taken to promote the women's participation in terms of registration, in terms of voting, and also to promote the rights and the duties of the indigenous people in the Philippines. I quite like the poster of Politics Has No Gender, and if I may, Mrs. Esmeralda, extend this to something like elections has no gender. I think it would be a nice addition to your very good motto. Yeah, politics has no gender. I think it would be nice to have also elections has no gender. That would be very inclusive for us. Thank you for that one. That's a very good one, Mrs. Esmeralda. We would like your initiatives taken by Comelec and also Mr. Kim's presentation on the legislative measures put in place to promote political participation of women. And what I also enjoyed was how we have to probably at some point in time think seriously of giving financial inducements to political parties to encourage them to field more women candidates so that we can have a better participation of women in the process. I like the systemic changes talked about by Mr. Kim, and I think this gives us a very good ground, a stepping ground, to open the floor now for people to ask questions, clarifications, or make some observations. Thank you very much. Any questions? Antonio, if there are no questions from the floor, may I pick your brain? You've been on the field for decades now. So how do you feel EMBs in some parts of the world should address the issues of the disconnect between the youth and the political establishment? You were absolutely right when you talk about the disillusionment amongst the youth. So what do you think we should do as EMBs to address this very pressing area of concern? Thank you.
Can you hear me? Yeah. Thank you, Irfan. Well, I think, leaving aside remote areas, trying to address the problem generally, I think, one of the most effective ways to engage the youth is to target, the voters of the future already before they become voters, and target them with civic and voter education information programs already from the schools. Like I've been in countries where the EMB organized mock elections in schools where young students, not of voting age, before the voting age, they engage in elections. One is, few of them act as the MP, some act as the candidates, and some act as the voters. So it gives them a very good first immersion of how an election works and what is supposed to achieve and why it's important to vote. Aside from that, I would also work on the political system. As I mentioned in my presentation, there is an increasing disconnect between the constituents and the representatives. There is political parties are perceived to follow more their own interest than those who have elected them. Also true. There is corruption. There is some of them. All these political movements that have replaced political parties, for instance, in Europe, they prove to be like protest vote. they prove to be unable to fulfill their promises. This is creating a disconnect between voters and representatives, and voters, especially young voters, will not have a meaningful choice anymore. So try to reverse that by also working on not only on electoral reform, but also mainly on reform of political systems, I would say.
Thank you, Antonio. If I may probably put the question in a different way to all the three presenters, it would appear that the problem is more deep-rooted than we think. Sorry. It seems that the youth are more very engaged on social media, on WhatsApp, Facebook, and more now Instagram and Twitter. But when it comes to making their voices heard through the ballot box, we just simply do not show up. Why do you think this is the case, and what we should do to address this very, very serious issue? Thank you.
I'll leave it to my co-panelists.
Any one of you?
I think Esmeralda has the same problem I had before. She cannot unmute.
I have a very poor connection in the internet. Can I please request for the repetition of the question, please?
Thank you. I was just saying that it would appear that the youth, where we have a more deep-rooted problem with the youth. We are very engaged on social media, on WhatsApp, Facebook, and lately more on Instagram and Twitter. But when it comes to making their voices heard through the ballot box, they simply do not show up at election time. So what we should do as initiatives, as EMBs, to try and get this right. So we should run the extra mile, the youth, not only engage on social media, but go and make their voices heard through a ballot box on election day. Thank you.
For the Philippines, actually, I think we have not mentioned also the application of our mobile application where the youth and even our persons with disabilities and all vulnerable sectors would like to register using their mobile applications, which are also available in the respective cellular phones or computers. And yes, we can, I think we can expand also and encourage more youth voters to also show up in the polling places during election day, especially at this time in the last 2022 NLE. We've shown that the youth had participated increasingly from 2010. And in every elections, we conducted not only voters registration, but also we included it in the curricula of their schools. So I think that's more encouraging for them when teachers in the respective universities and state colleges would be telling them even before they become voters to please exercise their right of suffrage and they can participate in the affairs of the government. And there are a lot of social media also applications where we can have ways to encourage them to register and vote even before they become voters. And on the actual day of voting, then we provide also the system where the youth can also see the importance of voting. Thank you very much.
Antonio, any observations on that, please? Thank you.
Yes, I think what would be important is the first step would be to understand the reasons why they do not vote. Could be different, could be political disillusionment, I mentioned before, could be lack of understanding of electoral processes and how democracy works could be remote. Some youth living in remote areas that they don't know what how and when to vote. A number of reasons. And as I say, I would address both the motivational factors, but also the contextual barriers. It could be, legal requirements, disenfranchising some segments of the electorate. Could be, so solutions I think will have to be devised after having made thoughtful analysis of, who these voters are, and especially the youth, and why they are excluded or they are deciding they are abstaining.
Let me briefly add something to what Esmeralda said. I totally agree with Esmeralda in terms of the importance of photo education in the classroom, because young students, they spend most of their time in the classroom, so it's not easy for EMBs to set an event where they invite all young students across the country. So it's not easy. So in that sense, I think it's very important that maybe we include photo education in their curricula. So we do something in the classroom. This is very important and very effective. But I think now many EMBs that are talking about the effectiveness of photo education in the classroom as well. Maybe they introduce some games as well, because the now young generations they are different generations. So if whether it's a photo education or whatever education, if it's boring, it sounds boring in the classroom, then probably they will lose their interest in this education. So playing games, making, I don't know, maybe EMBs or any related groups where school teachers, so they should keep exploring or developing the new curricula to intrigue young voters in photo education. Thanks.
Thank you very much for this. I don't know whether my sister commissioner from Nepal would want to say a few words to us before we can conclude on this session. Dr. Janaki Kumari Tuladhar, please, if you are there. Thank you.
She'll be joining us in the next session.
Okay, thank you very much. So, and since there are no more questions or clarifications, may I ask us to give a good round of applause to our three presenters. We have great presentations. Thank you very much, Mrs. Esmeralda, Antonio, and Mr. Kim. And it was most informative, and we look forward to seeing you very soon. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Same here.
Thank you, Excellency Rahman, for driving these discussions. Also, thank you to all our speakers, Mr. Spinelli, Ms. Ladra, and Mr. Kim. With that, we close this session, and we are just going to be moving into a short break of 10 minutes, wherein it's a stretching break or tea, coffee, and then we are going to be resuming with our next session, the technical session 2, which is on the theme Accessible Elections, Enhancing Participation of Persons with Disabilities and Senior Citizens. So enjoy this break, and looking forward to be all joining us at 4:20 Indian Standard Times, 10 minutes of break. Thank you. So welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, and we begin with our technical session 2, which is on accessible elections, enhancing participation of persons with disabilities and senior citizens. I welcome our esteemed co-chairs for this session, His Excellency Nizam Hozayev Zainuddin Mahamatovich, Chairman, Central Election Commission of Uzbekistan, and Her Excellency Dr. Janaki Kumari Tuladhar, Election Commissioner of Nepal, along with our distinguished presenters of the session, Mr. Kamal Bhattarai from Nepal, Mr. Ibrahim Hafiz from Maldives, Ms. Lasanthi Daskan from Sri Lanka. As we begin the session, may I request His Excellency Mr. Nizam Hozayev Zainuddin Mahamatovich Chairman Central Election Commission of Uzbekistan, for his opening remarks. Ladies and gentlemen, His Excellency Mahamatovich has earlier served as the Chairman of the Senate Committee of the Holy Majlis of the Republic of Uzbekistan on Science, Education, Culture and Sport, and also as the Chairman of the Committee on Science, Education and Health. In 2014, he was awarded the honorary title of Uzbekistan Kahramoni, that's the hero of Uzbekistan. On February 5th, 2021, he was elected to the post of the Chairman of the Central Election Commission of the Republic of Uzbekistan. As I request Excellency Mahamatovich for his opening remarks, as he's going to be addressing us in Russian language, may I request to be using the headphone on channel 1 for English translation. Thank you. Over to Excellency Mahamatovich. Ladies and gentlemen, we right now welcome and thank our Honorable Election Commission of India, Mr. Anuj Chandra Pandey, as he joins us and presides
Very good
over
afternoon, dear participants, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, respected Mr.
Excellency,
Rajiv Kumar.
have your mic on
Firstly,
the,
please allow me
probably
to
mute.
greet all, welcoming everyone on behalf of the Central Election Commission of the Republic of Uzbekistan. I express the best wishes, prosperity. I express the best wishes, prosperity and success in your professional activities. I'm very glad to meet all in the virtual Asian Regional Forum. And marking this occasion, would like to express my gratefulness about high professional level of the forum and vital importance of proposed topics. Special appreciation to the Central Election Commission of India, His Excellency Chief Election Commissioner of India, Mr. Rajiv Kumar, initiating the forum of persons with disabilities and senior citizens in the framework of the second session. Play undertake great political influence. All, as we say, details provided by WHO, who World Health Organization, persons with disabilities have more than 1 million persons, or 15% of world population. United Nations Convention on Rights of Persons with Disabilities established legal base and set forth standards for fully legitimate and equitable participation of persons with disabilities in social life and activities connected with election, Article 29(12). Therefore, all persons with disabilities, they have right to vote and be elected. Therefore, they have chance to actively participate in political processes as in the initiation phases of elections and organization of elections and evaluation of elections result. Global phenomenon that has deep effect on rights of all people, including political. This is aging of world's population. In accordance with High Commissioner on People's Rights, as on May 2021, expected that number of senior citizens aged 65 years and above will exceed double and equal to 1.5 million persons. So by 2050, every 6 person in the world will be aged 65 years or above. They recognize standards and norms of international rules on political rights of citizens. international documents as the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. They secured and ensure that senior citizens have the right to participate in government activities directly or through their representatives. They have right to vote and be elected. So, as other citizens with different ages, without any discrimination, this category of right directed to help senior citizens that they will not be lonely, great usage of their experience and knowledge in multiple political processes, including elections. Taking advantages of the opportunity, I would like to share with you legal regulation in Uzbekistan. In the framework of current legislation, all persons with disabilities and senior citizens have equal rights to vote and be elected. In accordance with Article 18 Constitution of Republic of Uzbekistan, all citizens of Republic of Uzbekistan have equal rights and freedom and equal before the law without distinction of gender, race, nationality, language, religion, social origin, beliefs, personal social status. 32 articles of Constitution Republic of Uzbekistan ensures right of citizens to participate in the management of people's affairs and government affairs, direct or through representatives. This participation established through self-governance, referendum, and democratic establishment of government bodies. Therefore, United Nations Convention on Rights of Persons with Disabilities during election campaign 2021 in the Republic of Uzbekistan for persons with disabilities were executed complex of measures facilitating the best participation them including all material for votings or facilitations. Therefore, when we talking about our coordination with IFES in February, including training program Bridge, we executed 3 days training topic, equal access, participation of people with disabilities and in elections. This training from Central Election Commission or different organizations with people with disabilities, scientists, theory, and also media persons, and we continue this work. So now we would like to also hear view of colleagues, representatives from Election Commission from Nepal and Maldives, and also representative of IFES for Asian region regarding topic for exceeding participation in the election of persons with disabilities. I think that we have to now continue execution of our forum, and we will to hear different opinions and experience that will help us. Thank you for your attention. So now, respected ladies and gentlemen, we have to start our technical session, and as per our program, to start the realization. Therefore, we have 15 minutes for the presentation. And after this, I think now we will hear 3 minutes presentation, and it will be sufficient for the understanding of different expertise from different countries. So now we are advising and requesting Mr. Kamal Bhattarai, Deputy Secretary of Election Commission, Nepal, with his presentation.
Excellency, before we have the presentation, if I can request the co-chair.
Перед тем, как начать презентацию,
Her Excellency Dr. Janaki Kumar Tuladhar, Election Commission of Nepal, for her opening remarks. Dr. Janaki Kumari Tuladhar holds a doctorate from the Lucknow University, Masters in Management and Bachelor's in Law and Education from the Tribhuvan University. In the past, she has worked as a manager in the Rural Development Bank. After she retired from the Rural Development Bank, she has been establishing herself as a lawyer and a social activist. She has been advocating for the problems of conflict victims, women, children, and the third gender, tribals and Dalits, and backward classes and differently abled communities and their solutions. I request our co-chair, Excellency Dr. Janaki Kumari Tuladhar, ma'am. May I request you for your opening remarks? Okay, I believe we are facing some technical problem with that. I think we'll move on to the presentations. And I would like to request our first presenter, inviting Mr. Kamal Bhattarai, Under Secretary, Election Commission of Nepal, for his presentation. Mr. Bhattarai has been working with the Election Commission of Nepal since February 2022 in the Planning, Monitoring and Foreign Relations Division. He's going to be making a presentation on inclusive elections, enhancing the participation of youth, gender, and citizens.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me?
Yes. Yeah, we can hear you. Please go ahead.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you also,
you.
And your presentation is also on the screen.
His Excellency Chief Election Commissioner of India. Excellencies and all esteemed participants, greetings from Election Commission of Nepal. First of all, I would like to thank Election Commission of India for organizing this forum aimed at making our elections inclusive, accessible and participative. And I am also thankful to ECI for inviting the ASEAN to participate in this technical session on this theme. So I'd like to start my presentation. The presentation is brief. So I'm going to talk about the inclusive election, enhancing participation of youth, gender and citizen in remote areas. So here I would like to explain some of our existing provisions and what we are doing and what challenges we are facing. So first of all, I'd like to start with some constitutional and legal provisions regarding inclusive election. So first of all, the president and vice president should be represented from different gender or community and political party in the election. Out of the speaker and deputy speaker of the House of Representatives and provincial assembly, one must be woman, and they should represent different political party. This is just a brief introduction of the Election Commission. I don't want to talk much here. Next slide, please. This is the brief introduction about the Commission, its composition, and here are some principles. Next slide, please. So I was talking about the existing constitutional legal provisions. So out of the chairman and vice chairman of the National Assembly, one must be woman. And in the proportionate electoral system of 110 members for a specific political party, to represent in the House of Representatives. The whole nation should be regarded as one constituency. Every political party should fix candidates in closed list based on population in accordance with federal laws from among the women, Dalits, indigenous and ethnic groups, khas areas, Madhesis, Tharus, Muslims, and backward regions. In such candidature, geography and regional balance should also be considered. Yes. So while fixing the candidacy by political party for the position of proportionate electoral system in the House of Representatives and Provincial Assembly, the persons with disability also must be represented. At least one third of the total number of elected members representing some political party at the federal parliament and provincial assembly should be women. And similarly for the National Assembly, out of 56 elected members, 8 members including at least 3 women, 1 Dalit and 1 person with a disability or minority from each province should be elected. And out of 3 members nominated by the president, at least 1 member should be woman. Similarly, another provision, any political party while filing candidacy for the proportional electoral system should prepare a closed list representing women, Dalits, indigenous groups and so on based on the population and regional balance. Next slide, please. So, while preparing a closed list of proportional candidates for House of Representative and Provincial Assembly by a political party, at least 50% of the total number of candidates should be women. They should also include candidates from disabilities and should submit the closed list in a fixed format that should distinctly state the candidature included on the basis of inclusion. After fixing the number of seats in the House of Representatives and Provincial Assembly that a political party is entitled, the Commission should inform the political parties to determine the number of members representing from their parties at least 1/3 of the total number of members, women representing on their behalf. In the first part of the effective electoral system, the amount of money to be deposited as guarantee for candidacy should be waived by 50% for women, Dalits, and minorities for economically deprived candidates.
It's Rajiv, you can see your slide, which is on existing constitution and legal provisions.
The Commission will adopt gender-friendly and inclusive principles while formulating the election policies, operating the programs, managing the staffs, and monitoring and observation of the election. Similarly, the another provision is the political parties should provision as per the party constitution to guarantee representations based on proportional inclusive principle, and that should reflect social diversity while electing, nominating and appointing members in their party structure and committees, and at least 1/3 of the members must be women in their committees at all levels. Similarly, the political parties have the rights and responsibilities to contribute to building equitable society by eliminating social discriminations of all kinds, violence and discriminatory practices such as untouchability. Political parties should nominate at least 50% of women for the election of chairperson, vice chairperson, mayor, deputy mayor, and the chief and deputy chief of the district coordination committee. There must be provisions to increase the representation of women with the target of 40% in federal parliament and provincial assembly, and 42% in the local levels by 2030. This is the goal of the ASEAN. Next slide, please. So, Election Commission of Nepal has endorsed gender and inclusion policy in election management 2021. So, I want to talk about it. Can you please change the slides? Next, please. Okay. So here I want to talk about the present situation, what Election Commission is doing on this theme. We have gender and inclusion focal persons in all political parties. As per our request, they have appointed the focal persons and gender and inclusion focal persons in all field offices of ASEAN. Similarly, coordination meetings with respective constitutional bodies regarding these issues, and we are conducting the targeted voter education programs in the remote areas aimed at enhancing the participation of citizens in the electoral process with special focus on youth and gender issues. Similarly, ASEAN is collaborating with different development partners such as IFES. Next slide, please. Just before, Election Commission of Nepal has completed the local level election, and in the election, the ratio of women representatives is increased by 1% in total in comparison to the previous election, and reaching 41% of the total representatives. And our target is to reach 42%, and we are almost close to the target. And more than 46,000 representatives have been elected and are part of the federal democratic system, ensuring inclusive and proportional representations. And now the date for the federal and provincial elections has been scheduled to, on November 10, 2022. It's for the Constitution. ASEAN is on its preparation. Can you please go to the next slide? Here, I just it's just a glimpse of the youth representations in the local level elections, which just completed, and 41%, 41.1% of the total candidates are from the age group of 21 to 40 years, and almost in the same ratio they are elected. So in the total data of the representations in local level, 41% representatives are from the age group of 21 to 40 years. Next, please. Here I want to show the gender representation in local level election, and here also almost 41.22% in local level representatives are female, and similarly in the district development committee 46.01%, and in the executive committee 64.81% are female. The next slide. Next slide, please. Okay. So what we are facing, the challenges regarding gender inclusion in the youth and also in the citizens in remote areas. So one of the main challenge is to empower them, empower the backward class areas, gender and communities as per constitutional and legal provisions and in accordance with the principle of gender equality and inclusion. And another challenge we are facing is to ensure representations and participation of women and targeted groups in all process and phases of the election management. We need to increase the number of the inclusion groups. Similarly, to institutionalize the leadership, ownership, participation, and representation of women and target groups in all levels, regions, and bodies of government in election management through gender and inclusion perspective. And the last one, last challenge that we are facing is building common understanding between election commission and the political parties and all other electoral stakeholders on the concept of gender and inclusion, though we have done so much legal provisions. So this is all my presentation, and thank you so much for listening.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Bhattarai, for sharing with us the initiatives and measures which you're taking in Nepal towards making the elections inclusive. And with that, I now invite our next presenter, Mr. Ibrahim Hafiz, Director, EC of Maldives. He's the Director of the Human Resource Training and Regulation Division of the Election Commission of Maldives. And before this, he was employed at the President's Office and also lectured on the Sharia law at several educational institutions in the Maldives. Over to our presenter, Mr. Hafiz.
Thank you. Good afternoon from the Maldives. First of all, can you please run the presentation from your side, please?
Requesting our tech team to kindly put on the presentation of Mr. Hafiz.
Thank you, everyone. My name is Ibrahim Hafiz, and I will be, since we had a long day, I'll be briefly presenting the perspective on inclusiveness and participation and accessibility in elections in the Maldives. Before going to the main topic for the purpose of this presentation, I will give a brief introduction on Maldives. After that, I will give a small introduction about the Election Commission of the Maldives. Similarly, I will summarize some aspects of the current electoral process in the Maldives. First of all, the previous one, please. Previous slide, please. The Maldives is a nation in the Indian Ocean. The country is comprised of 1,192 islands, which are grouped in double-chained of 26 atolls. Population is almost 500,000. 50% are 50.6% are male and 49.4% are female. The current constitution of the Maldives is a modern universally guarantees the fundamental rights, which was adopted in 2008. Maldives has a presidential representative democracy, and Maldives is a republic. We have a unicameral parliament, which is composed of 87 members serving a 5-year term. The judicial system in the Maldives is vested, the power of judiciary is vested in the Supreme Court of the Maldives and the High Court and lower court. All matters adjudicated for the courts of the Maldives shall be decided upon in accordance with the constitution and the parliamentary laws and Islamic Sharia laws. The function of local government is to elect ad hoc councils and island councils. Next slide, please. The Election Commission of the Maldives was established on 7th August 2008 as an independent and impartial institution as stated Article 177 of the Maldives Constitution. Under the current constitution, the Election Commission Maldives was, as I mentioned earlier, was established in 2008. And the current Election Commission of the Maldives has 5 members, which will be appointed for each 5-year term. The main mandate of Election Commission of the Maldives is to conduct and supervise all state elections and public referendums, as well as to monitor and regulate the political parties in the Maldives. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. As for the election process in the Maldives, all Maldivian citizens which are above 18 years old have the right to vote in all elections, in the general elections. According to the General Election Act, when election is to be held, the Election Commission shall make a public announcement pertaining to that particular election in accordance with the manner specified in the specific law. This announcement must be include the type of election, the deadline given to stand for elections, and the qualification of individuals standing for election, a detail of information and things to be furnished individuals standing for election, and also it must include a time and a place where information and things to have be submitted by individuals standing for election, and also the date and timing of voting and the date and timing for announcement of election results. And also, it's important to note that the Election Commission of Maldives prepares and maintains the registry which specifies all citizens who have the right to vote, which is named as Voters Registry. The Voters Registry contains mainly names and date of birth and gender, permanent address and national identity of the voters. Not less than 45 days before an election, the Election Commission should publish the register of electors, including updated information pertaining to electors' name, gender, and permanent address in the government gazette. And a copy of this registry is sent to all political parties and candidates. All Maldivian citizens above the 18 years old who has any complaint with regard to this registry should, or rather has the right to complain, to file a complaint. And the Election Commission must review the complaint within 5 days. If the complainant is not pleased with the decision made by the Election Commission, the complainant has the right to a case filed at the High Court within 5 days from the date that the decision of the Election Commission. Voter awareness is a legal obligation of Election Commission of the Maldives. Therefore, before each general election, Election Commission of Maldives conducts public awareness sessions, which is mainly targeted to the general public. And also, Election Commission of Maldives holds political trainings and awareness sessions for political parties and candidates, their respective representatives. And also for election observers and monitors, and also we also conduct an intensive training program for the election officials at the voting stations, and also a training for the election officials who will be conducting many other related election tasks. So, next slide, please. Here you can see some of the awareness materials we use for voting process. You can see clearly how our voter is directed for the election day processes. Next slide, please. In the Maldives, the voter turnout is pretty much high. In the year 2018, in the presidential elections, 89, almost 90% of the eligible voters voted in this election. And for the 2019 parliamentary elections, 81% of, almost 82% of the eligible voters voted in these elections. Next slide, please. And as for the topic we are going to talk about today, voting in the Maldives, we always try voting is accessible to all eligible voters, as there's a polling station in each and every island, and also in each, we are talking about 1190 something islands, and also in each a tourist resort, and also in the jail. And most of the time we place voting stations or polling stations in abroad. An online registration method has been introduced since COVID-19 pandemic. But the awareness about this new method has been provided to voters in to understand as use the equipment at ease and comfortably. To ensure the transparency of our elections, observers and monitors and candidates and their representatives are given opportunities to participate in observing the polling stations during the elections. Next slide, please. Voting has been in the Maldives and always accessible in more ways than one for persons with disabilities by various means. As previously I mentioned, a polling station is situated in every island and jail and resort, and even abroad, in reducing the need for travel, and these polling stations are the ground level, which would be easiest way to access for the people with disabilities. Aided voting choices is given to a certain group of people with disabilities, where they have a choice to choose a person to assist them throughout the voting process, just so they can exercise their voting rights. Next slide, please. Election Commission of the Maldives ensures everyone is aware of the information, and thus have a video and audio awareness clips that we share in various platforms to reach our targets, such as Facebook and other online platforms. The video clips include sign language that are targeted at specific disadvantaged groups. We reach all our targeted groups by using multiple combination of methods such as Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and also TV advertisements and radio and posters. Next slide, please. Still, we have some challenges in the Maldives. First of all, the budget is kind of the limitation we face in the Maldives. Through, we always have to travel to the islands. For this, we need handsome budget. But most of the time, the government or the state reduces the budget, and we face many difficulties to conduct awareness campaigns and workshops throughout the Maldives. And we have also limitation of technical persons in the Maldives. We lack certain specialized people in the field, such as sign language and braille are needed. And also the geographical distribution of the islands in the Maldives makes it difficult for us to reach all the people in the same time, especially for persons with disabilities without awareness campaign. Most of the people with disabilities do not have access to smartphone and rely on help with others. And the most effective ways to reach out and make them aware is by conducting door-to-door awareness campaign sessions. Next slide, please. In future, we have plans. Election Commission of the Maldives expects people who are visually impaired are given the right to vote without the aid of another person, as we are targeting include a braille in our ballot paper. The opportunity to work as an official at the polling stations will be also given to the persons with disabilities in the near future. Also, we are trying to develop a network of trainers and officials to work in the polling stations. The process of designing 3 course structures, certificate 1, 2, and 3, will be completed by the end of 2023. Even I have not mentioned in the this presentation, I would like to raise some concerns regarding some gender issues and in the elections in the Maldives. As you have seen in this presentation, a high percentage of women do vote in the Maldives. About 49% of voters in Maldives are women. However, as for the political parties, women have played major roles in political party activities at the grassroots level, in organizing, attending campaign rallies, and conducting door-to-door outreach in significant numbers. However, this is not translated into leadership roles within the political parties in the Maldives, even in women's wings in political parties in the Maldives. And also, we face some difficulties. Women's development committees in the Maldives. WDCs are believed to be a solid platform and a framework for women to network, plan, and implement actions to support the community needs. WDCs are often not fully aware of their mandate and lack both the power and the budget to fulfill their mandate and vast number of resignations recorded in recent years. Despite the challenge, there are exemplary WDCs in the Maldives. And also, women's representation in the elections, I think I have mentioned about this. Percentage of context in the elected offices are extremely low in the Maldives. Only 4 candidates out of 87 seats in the current national parliament represents women. Decentralization Act. To tackle some of these problems, we have been trying some tactics throughout the years, and we have been able to tackle some of the problems facing women's representation in the electoral process, or rather in elections. We have been able to amend the Decentralization Act to reserve 1/3 of local council seats for women. In the last election, total 834 female candidates participated in LCE local council elections in 2020. 388 candidates were elected. Also, I would like to mention some of the barriers affecting women's political participation in the Maldives. First of all, lack of finance resources and knowledge, beliefs and perceptions of the gender roles, and slow legal reforms for temporary special measures. I would like to recommend some recommendation regarding this aspect as well. Political parties promote a greater participation of political arena. The key factor for increasing women's political participation raise awareness, women's empowerment opportunities in the political party leadership, conduct workshops within political parties on how to campaign and perform public speaking, as well as women's role and responsibilities of the government officials and government operations for politically active women at the island and national level. And also conduct an orientation program for women participating in internship, mentorship, and training programs to create a network of and coming women who are interested in seeking political office. Increasing women's participation in the local level is a very important part I would like to stress here. Increase women's exposure to how government works so that they are prepared to run for political office and be effective leaders. Also conducting a study to identify why active members of WTC, especially in the Maldives, do not run for political office. And also to conduct a study to identify the reasons behind members' designation in WTCs in the Maldives. So these are the things I would like to express here.
So thank you. Thank you, Mr. Hafiz. Thank you for your presentation, highlighting the challenges and also certain concerns and also measures which you are taking in Maldives towards making elections more accessible and inclusive. Our next speaker is Ms. Lasanthi Daskan, the Deputy Country Director, International Foundation for Electoral Systems Office in Sri Lanka. She's a lawyer with a background in human rights, has over 15 years of experience working to promote the empowerment of marginalized groups with a particular focus on the rights of persons with disabilities. Through her work with IFES in Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, and other global IFES offices, Ms. Daskan supports election management bodies, university, and civil society partners in their efforts to further promote inclusive public and political engagement. I request and invite Ms. Daskan for her presentation.
Thank you very much for the very kind introduction. I hope technology will be kind to us because, as you know, Sri Lanka is going through a crisis. Connections are not very good, also with power cuts. So excuse me if there are any glitches. First of all, thank you very much to the Election Commission of India for inviting us for this webinar and having us in this panel. And we're indeed very proud to hear our name being mentioned by several of the speakers. It is a testimony to the work that we've done, we are doing across the world, and IFES is to inclusive electoral processes. And I must acknowledge that I'm making the presentation on behalf of Hafiz and my regional director, who is also listening in from our head office, although it's very early for her. And also for, I'm going to highlight the work that has been done by the Election Commission of Sri Lanka, and the scenario would be based on Sri Lanka. So I am going to try and share my, let's hope it would work. Someone please tell me if you can see what I'm sharing. I'm going to highlight mostly on persons with disabilities, but then also related to the political participation of older persons. So if you go to slide number 2, the first slide with details in it, I will just try to, yes. So as you know, I will not go into the global data because it was spoken of, but His Excellency, the chairperson, also mentioned the issue of statistics. Disability disaggregated data is an issue in most parts of the world, and it is the same for Sri Lanka. And the statistics, the Department of Census and Statistics has published, we have statistics from the department only from 2011, where it estimates that the population of people with disabilities could be 8.7% of the population. And now it's 11 years later, the situations have changed, the contexts have changed, and also with COVID, we know there are people who have acquired disability. And then this data is not counted, and it is also a problem for this data to be counted. So we are in a place where we are not exactly sure of the number of people with disabilities in the country, but we assume organizations of people with disabilities estimate that it could be around 12% of the population. And again, the World Bank statistics say the population of aged persons is 12.3, and of people who are 60 and older. And this is we are a very fast aging country, and we are the highest proportion of older adults in South Asia. So the other issue we have is, as we know, in most parts of the world, and especially in our part of the world, disability is highly stigmatized, and there is a reluctance from people with disabilities and their families to be counted into disability numbers. And this is so for mainly also for people, for the aging population, because they do not, because of the stigma around disability, they do not prefer to be identified as persons with disabilities. And this, again, because of this results in them being left out of whatever measures that are put in place in terms of accessibility and providing services. And in our country, it's still mostly a social welfare approach. And like I mentioned, there are birth related disabilities, medical injuries, accidents, a higher rate of road traffic and accidents and domestic injuries, non-communicable diseases, which are also related to aging, and the conflict which we had, the 30-year conflict, and also now as a result of COVID. If you can go to slide number 3. Again, the topic is disability and aging in Sri Lanka. And just to give you an idea, people with disabilities are left out of education still, mostly, and economic participation, public and political participation is very low, and exclusion is high now, post-COVID, and also in the context where the country is going through an economic crisis. People with disabilities are one of the most marginalized populations, especially, and if you consider the intersectionalities, women with disabilities persons with disabilities from rural areas, plantation communities, and such. So as a country, we have ratified the CRPD in 2017, but we have yet failed to introduce enabling legislation. This is one of the biggest issues we have in the country, because there is no, although there may be a will in the part of the public and private, public and private organizations to incorporate inclusion, but because there is no law that that mandates them to do so, this becomes a problem. And budgeting also becomes a problem. And we have a disability rights law from 1996. It's outdated. So what did the Sri Lanka Election Commission do, and what are they trying to do in terms of providing providing access to people with disabilities to political process, elections and political processes? So one of the initiatives that IFIS supported, if you can go to slide number 4, please. Disability inclusive elections in Sri Lanka. So this is a voluntary national accessibility consortium or a working group that is facilitated by the Election Commission, supported by IFIS and My Right and CBM International, where we have been able to successfully bring together these disability organizations to work together mainly towards supporting the Election Commission, providing technical support and guidance to the Election Commission on making electoral processes inclusive, and also working with election monitoring agencies and stakeholders, observers and stakeholders, to ensure that elections and electoral processes are inclusive. This Diesel group, it's the acronym is Diesel. A Diesel group also works with other civil society organizations, say gender groups, youth groups, to ensure that people with disabilities are engaged in public life and activities at a national and regional level. Slide number 5. So if you look at the challenges, like I said, the gaps we have in the legal framework, lack of disaggregated data, and gaps in the voter registration process, lack of accessible technologies for voting, and physical infrastructure, as you know, in our countries is very challenging. And then especially if there are geographic challenges, this becomes more intensified. And then again, like I mentioned, stigma and discrimination, lack of accessibility or availability of accessible voting mechanisms, and then also lack of inclusive crisis mitigation mechanisms, as we saw when we did the Sri Lanka Election Commission successfully had an election, conducted an election in the midst of the COVID pandemic in 2020. But then one lesson learned was that inclusive crisis mitigation mechanisms and strategies were a great lack in our country. If you go to slide number 6, so I'm going to just highlight a few of the Election Commission of Sri Lanka and Diesel collaboration successes as a lesson exercise. So one of the first things, if you can go to slide number 7, please. One of those pilots, successful pilots that the Election Commission was able to implement in 2020 was the introduction of accessibility data collection format. So in Sri Lanka, we still have a manual paper-based voter registration system, which is a challenge, which was a greater challenge, which continues to be a greater challenge, because it was a challenge during COVID, because the village level administrator, whom we call the Muraladra, has to go house to house, filling this form every year during the enumeration process. And because of COVID, this wasn't possible. And now again, because of the economic crisis, I don't know if you've heard of this, but our country does not have enough paper. So a paper-based voter registration system is very challenging. But what the Election Commission is now trying to do, this format that they developed developed with Diesel and also with the technical support of IFES to collect accessibility data. When we did not call this a disability data collection format, because A, the Election Commission does not need to know what disability you live with. The Election Commission needs information on what accessibility the Election Commission can give you when as a voter. So for this, this format was developed and it was piloted, successfully piloted, but then again, because this is a manual paper-based format, it had its challenges. So the questions that are being asked here are things like, what is the facility do you need at the polling center? Do you need a ramp? Do you need any other accessibility than a ramp? Do you need sign language interpretation? Do you need a braille printed information? Do you need better lighting? Do you need a magnifying glass? So things like that. So we try to cover, or do you need slow and clear explanations? So these are the questions that the Election Commission is asking. And what they're trying to do now is to bring this format online and to digitalize this process, because they are also considering taking the voter registration online, which is challenging because technology is not, as you can see with my example, technology is a challenge in this country. But this is something that they're trying to do, to bring this online and to introduce a system where data of accessibility data of people with disabilities could be entered into this format. And with that, they can progressively try to introduce measures that would provide access to people with disabilities. And this is based on electoral division. So in each electoral division, in an ideal situation, if this becomes successful, and they would have data on each electoral division, the accessibility requirements of people with disabilities. Slide number 8 is a photograph of a person with visual disabilities testing the tactile ballot guide the Election Commission is trying to introduce. So the Election Commission is now trying to make use of this period where we are not having elections to have consultations with organizations of blind persons, blind and visual people with disabilities, to introduce this plastic sleeve into which the ballot paper can be inserted. And the plastic sleeve would have markings which can be identified by people with visual disability. But then this is still in pilot phase. We've done about 4 pilot testings in 4 locations with organizations of people with visual disabilities. And we have received, the Election Commission has received comments for improvement and how best these markings can be made, and how, because in Sri Lanka we have a complex electoral system, and usually the ballot papers are very long, and in such instances how this could be adopted to suit each different election in the country. I would say the easiest election for this to be introduced would be a presidential election, where the process is not as complicated. And then another thing that the Election Commission and the Sri Lanka Central Federation of the Deaf is currently working on is to develop a poll worker training guide on sign language. So basic signs a person would require, a poll worker would require at the polling center. Things like, do you have your ID? What is your name? Who is accompanying you? Do you know how to vote? Can you please collect the ballot paper? And also this also includes names of institutions and persons like the chairman of the Election Commission of Sri Lanka. So basic signs that the poll workers, in a very simplified format, so we're developing this video, which can be shared on WhatsApp, and then the poll workers will be trained on this by the Central Federation of the Deaf, and then they will also have this video as reference, as refreshers during an election when they want to communicate with deaf people who would be coming into the polling center. The Election Commission has also done accessibility audits And then this is one such place where we did. And this young person who is in a wheelchair is working. He's staff of the Election Commission of Sri Lanka. So that is one more excellent inclusive measure that the Election Commission of Sri Lanka has taken. And I know that the Indian Election Commission has also taken such initiatives. So lesson learned from this one particular, where you see the photograph from this one particular accessibility audit, is that it is really challenging. So we really need to, as a country, we really need to look at alternatives because making polling centers accessible is, in the long run, we need to do it. But then immediate measures, we have to look at alternatives. So another thing that the Election Commission realized was that, and also was highlighted by organizations of people with disabilities, was that, I'm sorry, slide number 11, please. So that people with disabilities have lesser, people in general have lesser civic awareness, civic education. So we developed this booklet on constitutional democracy, mainly based on the Constitution of Sri Lanka, and it was also given in sign language. So we also have a sign language video on that where we introduce the basic concept of constitutional democracy and the Constitution of Sri Lanka. And the Diesel Group has also made recommendations to the Constitutional Recommendations Committee of Sri Lanka in 2020, and also the Electoral Legal Reform Recommendations. Again, the report of which has come up a few months ago, and now the Election Commission of Sri Lanka is planning to hold a few consultations with Diesel in different parts of the country on the necessary electoral legal reforms that are required to make electoral processes inclusive. And lastly, number 12, so we have done throughout from 2018 onwards for all of the elections that we have had inclusive voter and civic education programs. These included posters, in-person training programs, awareness programs, videos, sign language information, and Braille information in Braille for those who require Braille, and also information, online information, which can be used by blind persons who are using the technology. So having said that, going to slide number 13, the other so the Election Commission of Sri Lanka continues to have consultations with, I'm sorry, the term should be OPDs. I haven't changed it, updated it. It's organizations of people with disabilities. And then as part of the extended version of this poll worker sign language video training is to develop an electoral sign language lexicon for Sri Lanka, because one of the things that we realized was that most of the elections and democracy related language terminology is missing in the Sri Lankan sign language. We're trying to develop this lexicon. It will be a longer process. We are starting consultations, so it will require wide consultations with electoral stakeholders, Election Commission of Sri Lanka, sign language experts, sign linguistics experts. But we are launching on this. We've also contributed to voter enumeration process, inclusive voter enumeration processes, and then also poll worker trainings and awareness sessions and webinars on inclusion. So these are some of the Diesel Group, along with the Election Commission of Sri Lanka, with the support of Diesel and facilitation of Hafiz, has conducted. I hope I haven't gone over time. If you can put slide number 14. Thank you so much once again for giving us this opportunity. We are very happy to discuss and to learn from you, and also if we can share our experiences with others, and if you find any of this information, we'll be very happy to share this. Thank you once again, and over to the chairpersons.
Thank you, Ms. Daskin. Thank you for your presentation, sharing your experience here with us. And with that, we open to further discussions. If I can request our co-chairs to please drive these discussions.
Спасибо.
Dear participants, please accept my gratefulness. So we completed our work in the framework of the technical session, and it was really great experience. We received new information. We got so many different contexts. All presentation covered or fully cover many aspects of the topic. I would like to ask participants if you have any question, any remarks, any suggestion, kindly ask. Please. Dear participants, if you have any remarks, any questions, maybe any additional information, kindly ask.
As I believe there are no questions or any views being expressed, if I can request you for your closing remarks.
We understand that now we completed all our activity in the framework of second technical session. It was really very interesting, and we saw so many details, data, statistic graphs, and all material were covered. Fully cover many aspects of the topic, and discussion was very interesting, and also I am thinking we received information and all details that will be useful for us in our practical activities. So once again, I would like to express my gratefulness to the organizer of this forum, and also my best wishes, good health and success in all our work. Thank you for your attention.
Truly grateful, Excellency Mahatovich, for leading this session, and also a big thank you to all our speakers. With that, as we approach the end of the summit, I would like to request Mr. Anup Chandra Pandey, Honorable Election Commissioner of India, for his closing remarks. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Pandey assumed charge as the Election Commissioner of India on the 9th of June 2021 and is NIS of the 84th batch, Uttar Pradesh cadre. He superannuated as the Chief Secretary, Government of Uttar Pradesh in August 2019. And during the span of 37 years of distinguished service in the Government of India, Mr. Pandey has worked in various ministries and departments at the centre and his state cadre of Uttar Pradesh. Mr. Pandey holds a very keen interest in writing and has authored a book titled Governance in Ancient India. This book explores the evolution, nature, scope, functions, and all related aspects of ancient Indian civil service from the Rig Vedic period to 650 AD. Must read, ladies and gentlemen. I now request Mr. Anup Chandra Pandey, our Honorable Election Commissioner of India, for his closing address and his observations.
At the outset, in this wrap-up session, let me say what a wonderful day it has been. Very enlightening, very educative, lot of insights about comparative practices in our respective Asian democracies. This forum has really provided a very good platform for cross-fertilization of ideas in running our democracies, of how to make them more inclusive, more accessible, and more participative. His Excellency Mr. Nizam Khojaev, Chief Election Commissioner, Uzbekistan. His Excellency Mr. M.I. Abdul, Election Commissioner, Mauritius. Her Excellency Dr. Janki Kumari Tuladhar, Election Commissioner, Nepal, distinguished delegates from fellow EMBs from Mexico, Mauritius, Maldives, Mongolia, Nepal, Philippines, and Uzbekistan, representatives from AWEB, IFES, and International IDEA, colleagues from the Election Commission of India, ladies and gentlemen. I must thank CEC, Uzbekistan, Mr. Nizam Khodviv, for chairing this technical session too. I also thank Election Commissioner Mauritius, Mr. Abdul Rahman, for co-chairing the first session with our Chief Election Commissioner Shri Rajiv Kumar ji. Friends, during the course of discussions today, we have heard a lot of interesting initiatives undertaken by various EMBs. It is interesting to note that in Maldives, voting is accessible to all eligible voters in every island, resort, jail, and even abroad with an online re-registration method. Aided voting choice is given to a certain group of people with disabilities. In Sri Lanka, electoral special provisions are available under the law for assisted voting. A diesel working group, that is Disability Inclusive Elections in Sri Lanka, that working group has been created with cross disability organizations and organizations representing the districts. AWEB Secretariat has suggested various ways of improving participation of women in elections. In the Philippines, the EMB has taken several initiatives, including partnerships with international organizations and conduct of survey on the barriers that hinder participation of women, with a view to enhance the participation of youth, gender, and citizens in remote areas. International IDEA has identified two categories of inhibitors: the motivational factors and the contextual barriers, urging EMBs to devise corrective strategies to achieve equal electoral access for the electorate. As you see, these and many more initiatives have been discussed throughout the day, and these initiatives which have been taken by the EMBs along with the suggestions made by international bodies like AWEB, like International IDEA and IFES, they have been commendable and will certainly support the cause of making elections more accessible globally. Well, friends, what we see is that issues of accessibility are universal, and most marginalized groups face barriers to their participation in the elections. The pandemic has increased the existing barriers for them. This requires that EMBs should make more efforts to engage and involve women, third gender, PWDs, senior citizens, and other marginalized groups in the election process. It has become all the more important to convince them that polling stations are COVID-19 safe. Extra measures should be built in to make the process of casting ballot comfortable. All of us here appreciate that there exists a gap in participation of PWDs across the world. This is despite the fact that everywhere the federal laws ensure that persons with disabilities face no discrimination. They are to be provided with all the facilities for their complete integration in all spheres of civic life. These gaps arise due to inaccessible polling places, due to obstructions in walkways, due to difficulties in reading information material, due to communication barriers especially with polling staff due to difficulties in reaching polling stations. PWDs do not know how to use polling equipment. Inadequate signage lead to problems in negotiating the polling booth. EMBs have made different efforts to address these issues. Some use alternate voting methods like postal voting or mobile voting options. Others use technology options. Some use assistance, they take the assistance of volunteers, wheelchairs, and built-in priority voting systems for the elderly and the disabled voters. For women in India, we have created all women polling stations, separate queues, separate toilets, and creches for children. What gives a cause for cheer to all of us is that there is a very enthusiastic participation from women, from senior citizens, and from persons with disability. The sight of a centenarian voter at the polling station inspires generations of young men and young women to carry forward this onerous responsibility all over the world. Election Commission of India is committed to enhance participation, to extend the facilitation, and to reorient public perception about the potential of these PWDs. Electoral practices must be inclusive. We should ensure that voices of PWDs are heard as equal citizens. Disability inclusion is a fundamental human right. It is also central to the promise of 2030 Agenda on Sustainable Development to ensure inclusive and equitable quality education. It will promote lifelong learning opportunities for all. Accessible elections was declared as the theme for year 2018. The journey of making elections accessible has been arduous, yet extremely meaningful, inspirational and innovation. They have made it possible to ensure a much larger participation of all marginalized groups in elections. Over the years, Election Commission of India has undertaken various initiatives. Postal ballot facility, Braille mapping of PWD, Braille epics, transportation provided to PWDs to and fro the polling stations, Braille mapping of PWD voters, assured minimum facilities, as well as a comprehensive nationwide multimedia campaign ensure that the mandate of the Election Commission of India regarding no voter to be left behind is fulfilled in letter and in spirit. However, this journey has taken a very long time. The Supreme Court of India directed to provide special facilities for PWDs at polling stations in 2004. Election Commission of India in 2004 itself introduced Braille on EVMs. In 2007, ECI introduced provision of basic minimum facilities at all the polling stations like ramps, like signages, like toilets. Auxiliary polling stations were created in 2014. National Voter Service Portal for easy registration was also launched. Technical Committee for Inclusion of Persons with Disabilities was established in 2015. Mapping of PWD voters began in 2016. In 2016, instructions were issued for accessible polling booths. With the appointment of accessibility consultants, accessible elections were first launched in 2018. ECI then conducted a national workshop on accessible elections and formations in 2018. It created a national advisory committee on accessible elections. Since then, ECI has introduced many actions on accessible elections. It introduced sign language and sensitization workshops for election officials. It developed a mobile-based PWD application. It ensured accessible facilities in national elections 2019. And let me tell you, we ensured that only single-story polling booths would be there. There will be no first floor. Just every election booth has to be on the ground floor itself in 2019. It created an accessibility division within the Election Commission. I would also like to point out that individual states have also taken up unique initiatives to make elections more accessible. In one of our provinces, Meghalaya, we have the first visually impaired music band. It's called Light After Dark. It's been identified and recognized at the state icon. In Mizoram, which is another province, public transport was assigned for transportation of PWDs on poll day. In Etawah in Uttar Pradesh, a wheelchair logo using 35,000 thumb imprints of citizens called Sakshamvas was created. In Chandigarh, a cricket match was organized to encourage PWDs to vote. Divyang Sarthi and Divyang Dolis, these are form of palanquins. They are used to facilitate PWDs and senior citizens in hilly areas where topographically it's a very difficult place. So for transportation of these PWDs in these hilly areas. ECI also introduced postal ballot facility for PWDs and senior citizens since the pandemic. That if you cannot come to the polling booth, the election commission will go to your home to pick your vote. So that was ensured during the pandemic. As a result, postal ballot in the past 11 state assembly elections held since the pandemic in 2020 increased, that is risen by 122%. Similarly, to enable the third gender community to vote, in 2008, ECI initiated reforms. It enabled approximately 1 million transgender population to exercise vote in a new category called Other, instead of being compelled to vote either as a male or as a female. In 2014, after our landmark Supreme Court judgment, which made a provision for recognizing transgender as third gender, provisions were made to categorize transgenders as third gender instead of others. During Lok Sabha elections 2019, 39,000 third gender electors were registered across the country, with Uttar Pradesh recording the highest number of electors as 7,800. Friends, finally, I would like to thank all of you for taking time out of your busy schedules to participate in this event and contributing towards a pressing concern. Increasing participation amongst all marginalized communities is of utmost importance to all of us, and making elections more accessible to all of us is the epitome of a more vibrant and participated democracy. I thank you once again, all of you, for sparing your time in this conference. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your very inspiring and enriching closing address. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, once again, big thank you to all our eminent guest speakers, the chairs and the co-chairs, and all the eminent delegates and participants joining us from different countries. Thank you for your valuable time and your participation and your suggestions. With that, we conclude the Asian Regional Forum being organized by the Election Commission of India. Wishing you all a very pleasant and a happy day ahead. Thank you.